Life in 1969. The summer the world changed. Close your eyes for a moment. Can you hear it? The crackle of a transistor radio, the roar of a muscle car engine, the scratchy announcement from Mission Control. The summer of 1969 wasn't just another season, it was the pivot point of the entire 20th century. This was the summer when humanity left Earth for the first time. When 500,000 people gathered in the rain to redefine what music could mean. When society itself seemed to split in two, with young people on one side and the establishment on the other. But 1969 wasn't just about the big moments you see in history books. It was about what life actually felt like, what your morning looked like, how much things cost, what you watched, what you wore, what you worried about. Today, we're going back, not just to the headlines, but to the everyday reality of life in 1969. We'll walk through an ordinary home, visit a typical grocery store, tune into the shows everyone was watching, and understand why this single year changed everything. Welcome to the summer the world changed. Welcome to 1969. Let's start with how you'd wake up in 1969. And no, it wasn't to the sound of a smartphone alarm. Your alarm clock was mechanical, wind up. It ticked all night long, and when it went off, it literally rang a bell. That sharp, metallic clanging sound? That was the soundtrack of every 1969 morning. If you were particularly modern, you might have had a clock radio, one of those boxy units that could wake you to music. The most popular model was the General Electric C4322, which cost about $18. You'd stumble out of bed, probably from under a thick comforter, because central heating was still a luxury in many homes. If it was summer, you might have a window air conditioning unit, but it was loud, expensive to run, and only cooled one room. Most people just opened windows and used fans. In the bathroom, your routine was simpler than today. Men used safety razors with double-edged blades, or maybe an electric razor like the Norelco triple header. Women shaved their legs with similar safety razors. Shaving cream came from a can or a cup with a brush. Your toothpaste was probably Crest or Colgate, but here's something wild. Fluoride toothpaste was still relatively new and considered almost space-age technology. The bathroom mirror probably had a medicine cabinet behind it, filled with products that would shock us today. Men used Brile cream in their hair. Women used Aquanet hairspray, so much of it that it formed a cloud. The can promised to hold your style all day long, and it wasn't lying. That hairspray could survive a hurricane. Heading downstairs, you'd pass a rotary phone, probably beige or black, hardwired into the wall. It was heavy, made of actual metal and hard plastic. Long-distance calls cost a fortune, so you kept them short. And if someone else was using the party line, yes, some neighborhoods still shared phone lines in 1969, you'd have to wait your turn. The kitchen was the heart of the home, but it looked different. Avocado green and harvest gold were the colors of the era. Your refrigerator was probably one of these colors, standing about 5 feet tall. It had a small freezer compartment at the top, barely big enough for a few ice cube trays and a carton of ice cream. No ice maker, no water dispenser, just a box that kept food cold. Let's talk money, because understanding what things cost in 1969 helps us understand what life actually felt like. The median household income in 1969 was about $8,000 a year. That's roughly $68,000 in today's money. But here's what makes it interesting: how far that money went. A gallon of gas cost 35 cents. You could fill up your entire car, a Chevy Impala with a 20-gallon tank, for $7. A new car itself? The average price was around $3,000. A brand new Volkswagen Beetle, the iconic car of the era, cost about $1,800. A Ford Mustang Mach 1 would set you back around $3,200. Housing was remarkably different. The median home price in America was $24,000. In California, you could buy a 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood for $30,000. Today, that same house would cost close to $1 million. A luxury apartment in Manhattan might rent for $300 a month. Today, try $4,000. At the grocery store, everything feels almost absurdly cheap by modern standards. A gallon of milk was about $1.10. A dozen eggs cost 60 cents. Ground beef was 59 cents a pound. A loaf of bread was 23 cents. You could walk out of the store with a week's worth of groceries for a family of 4 for about $30. Entertainment was affordable too. A movie ticket cost $1.50. You'd go to the cinema and watch Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or Easy Rider, or Midnight Cowboy. Films that defined the era. Popcorn and a Coke would add maybe 50 cents. A vinyl record album, the main way people consumed music, cost $4 or $5. That means for $20, you could buy the entire Beatles catalog released up to that point. Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, all available for about $5 each at your local record store. But some things were proportionally more expensive. A color television, the must-have item of 1969, cost around $400. That's nearly $3,000 in today's money. And it would break, frequently. You'd need a TV repairman to come to your house and replace vacuum tubes. Yes, tubes. A TV literally warmed up before the picture appeared. A telephone call across the country could cost $2 for 3 minutes during the day, about $17 in modern value. That's why people sent telegrams and letters. Postage was 6 cents for a first-class letter, and mail was delivered twice a day in many cities. In 1969, you had 3 TV channels. Maybe 4 if you lived in a big city. That was it. ABC, NBC, and CBS controlled what America watched. The number one show was Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, a wild, psychedelic sketch comedy show that featured rapid-fire jokes, go-go dancers, and political satire. It was irreverent, colorful, and unlike anything television had shown before. "Sock it to me" became a national catchphrase. Even Richard Nixon appeared on the show, awkwardly delivering that very line during the 1968 election. Other top shows included Gunsmoke. Yes, westerns were still huge. Bonanza, Mayberry RFD, and Family Affair. There was also The Carol Burnett Show, Hee Haw, and The Ed Sullivan Show, where you might see everyone from Elvis to the Supremes to Liberace. But July 1969 brought something unprecedented. On July 20th, an estimated 650 million people worldwide, nearly a fifth of Earth's population, watched Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin land on the moon. In America, it was Sunday evening. Families gathered around their television sets, many of them in black and white, and watched grainy footage as Armstrong descended that ladder. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It wasn't just a television event. It was the defining moment of the decade. People literally wept watching it. Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, took off his glasses and grinned like a child. Everyone remembered where they were when it happened. When you weren't watching TV, you were listening to the radio. AM radio dominated, with top 40 stations playing the hits on endless rotation. And what hits they were! In the summer of 1969, you'd hear Aquarius, Let the Sunshine In by The Fifth Dimension, In the Year 2525 by Zager and Evans, Honky Tonk Women by the Rolling Stones, and Sugar Sugar by the Archies. The Beatles released Abbey Road in September 1969, giving us Come Together, Something, and Here Comes the Sun. Led Zeppelin released their second album. The Who released Tommy. Creedence Clearwater Revival was everywhere with Bad Moon Rising and Green River. This was arguably the greatest single year in rock music history. And then there was Woodstock. In mid-August, nearly 500,000 young people descended on a dairy farm in upstate New York for 3 days of music that would define a generation. Jimi Hendrix's rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner became an anthem. Santana, Janis Joplin, The Who, Jefferson Airplane, Sly, and the Family Stone, all there, all legendary. It rained. It was muddy. There wasn't enough food or bathrooms, and yet people remember it as a transcendent experience. A brief moment when it seemed like peace and love might actually win? Fashion. Walk down any street in 1969, and you'd see two Americas. Actually, two worlds. On one side, you had the establishment, men in suits, narrow lapels, skinny ties, short hair, women in modest dresses, pillbox hats, and definitely pantyhose. This was the World War II generation, still dominant in positions of power, still dressing like it was 1959. But the youth culture looked completely different. This was the age of the hippie, and fashion became a form of rebellion. Men grew their hair long, really long, past the shoulders. They wore bell-bottom jeans, tie-dye t-shirts, fringe vests, and headbands. Women wore peasant blouses, miniskirts, and go-go boots. Or they wore maxi skirts down to their ankles, both at the same time somehow. Colors were psychedelic, oranges, purples, hot pinks, often in wild patterns. Paisley was everywhere. So were flowers, peace signs, and love beads. Fashion became political. Growing your hair long as a man was a statement. So was wearing a military jacket to an anti-war protest. For women specifically, 1969 was a moment of liberation and contradiction. The miniskirt had arrived in the mid-60s and was now mainstream, despite absolute pearl clutching from conservative America. But women also embraced flowing, natural looks inspired by folk culture and ethnic styles. The afro became a powerful symbol of black pride and beauty, rejecting the straightened hair standards that had been imposed for generations. Men's fashion was equally divided. Blue-collar workers and suburban dads still wore slacks and button-down shirts, but young men embraced mod styles from Britain: turtlenecks, bold patterns, leather jackets. The rebel look from movies like Easy Rider became aspirational. Shoes tell the story too. Establishment men wore Oxfords and loafers. Young people wore sandals, moccasins, or just went barefoot. At Woodstock, thousands of people walked around in the mud with no shoes at all. This wasn't just fashion, it was identity. You could look at someone and immediately know which side of the generation gap they were on. Technology and daily life. The technology of 1969 was simultaneously primitive and miraculous. We put a man on the moon using computers with less processing power than your digital watch. And yet, at home, life moved at a slower, more analog pace. Think about how you got information. There was no internet, no Google, no Wikipedia. If you wanted to know something, you looked it up in an encyclopedia, a massive set of books that cost hundreds of dollars and sat on a special shelf. The Encyclopedia Britannica was a status symbol. Or you went to the library. Homework meant books and handwriting. Students used typewriters for formal papers, manual typewriters that required real finger strength. Make a mistake? Use correction fluid or start over. The IBM Selectric typewriter, with its revolutionary typing ball, was the high-tech option at nearly $500. Photography required film. You'd take a picture, advance the film manually, and have no idea if the shot worked until you got it developed. A standard roll held 24 or 36 exposures. When it was full, you'd take it to a drugstore or camera shop and wait a week for prints. No previews, no deleting bad shots, no storage issues because you had 1,000 photos on your phone. Want to see a movie at home? Too bad. Home video didn't exist yet. You saw movies in theaters, or you waited years for them to appear on TV, edited and interrupted by commercials. The only way to rewatch something was to see it again in theaters or hope for a rerun. Music was physical. Records, tapes, and radio, that was it. The 8-track tape player in your car was considered cutting-edge technology. You'd buy an 8-track of Led Zeppelin II and play it until the tape wore out. The sound quality degraded over time. Tapes got chewed up by players, but it was yours, and you treasured it. Banking meant going to a bank, during banking hours, which were basically 9 to 3, Monday through Friday. Miss those hours, you were out of luck until Monday. No ATM existed yet. You wrote checks for everything, kept your balance in a little register, and reconciled your account when the monthly statement arrived by mail. Shopping meant stores. You couldn't order online. If you wanted something specific, you called the store to see if they had it, then drove there. Or you ordered from a catalog, Sears, Montgomery Ward, J.C. Penney, and waited weeks for delivery. News came at scheduled times, the evening news at 6 o'clock, the morning paper delivered to your door. If something major happened during the day, you might hear about it on the radio or from a neighbor, but mostly you found out about world events on a delay. When the Apollo 11 astronauts landed on the moon, it was live, but it was also the only thing happening. The entire world stopped to watch. Life had rhythms that technology didn't interrupt. Dinner time was sacred because no one could reach you. Family time meant actual presence. Boredom was a real state that you had to solve yourself. The cultural earthquake. But here's why 1969 really mattered. It wasn't just the moon landing or Woodstock or the Beatles. It was that everything was changing at once. The Vietnam War was tearing America apart. By 1969, over 36,000 Americans had died in Vietnam, and the war seemed endless. The draft hung over every young man like a death sentence. College campuses were in constant protest. Students occupied buildings. The National Guard was called in. At Kent State the following year, they would open fire on students, killing 4. The anti-war movement wasn't just about war. It was about questioning everything the previous generation had built. Why these social rules? Why this economic system? Why can't we live differently? The hippie movement, which seems quaint now, was genuinely radical then. People were dropping out of society entirely, forming communes, rejecting capitalism and consumerism. The civil rights movement was evolving. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated just the year before. The Black Panthers were rising. The struggle for racial justice was becoming more militant, more urgent. In 1969, the Black is Beautiful movement was celebrating African American culture and appearance. It was revolutionary. Women's liberation was exploding. Betty Friedan had published The Feminine Mystique in 1963, and by 1969, women were organizing in unprecedented ways. They were challenging the expectation that their only role was as housewives and mothers. They were entering the workforce, demanding equal pay, fighting for reproductive rights. The National Organization for Women was gaining power. The birth control pill, approved in 1960, was fundamentally changing women's lives and choices. And then there was Stonewall. In June 1969, police raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in New York's Greenwich Village. It was routine harassment until the patrons fought back. For 6 days, LGBTQ people and their allies clashed with police. It marked the beginning of the modern gay rights movement. Pride marches the following year commemorated Stonewall, and they continue today. Environmental awareness was just beginning. The first Earth Day would come in 1970, but in 1969, people were starting to notice pollution, smog, rivers catching fire. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring had been published in 1962, warning about pesticides. The counterculture embraced back to the land movements, organic food, natural living. Even space itself had become political. The moon landing was a triumph, but it was also a Cold War victory. We beat the Soviets. The space race was part of a larger ideological battle between capitalism and communism, between American democracy and Soviet authoritarianism. All of it, was happening simultaneously, and it was happening in living rooms, on television screens, in the streets. You couldn't escape it. You had to choose a side. The darker side of 1969. 1969 wasn't all peace, love, and moon landings. There was a darkness threading through the year that would eventually consume the decade's optimism. In August, just days after Woodstock ended, the Manson family committed a series of brutal murders in Los Angeles, including the killing of actress Sharon Tate. The murders shocked America and seemed to symbolize the dark underbelly of the counterculture. Charles Manson had created a cult from the hippie movement's rhetoric, twisting peace and love into something horrifying. In December, the Rolling Stones held a free concert at Altamont Speedway in California. It was supposed to be Woodstock West. Instead, it descended into chaos. The Hells Angels, hired as security, beat concertgoers. During the Stones' set, they stabbed a man named Meredith Hunter to death. The entire event was filmed. When the documentary came out, people saw the death of the 60s dream in real time. The war in Vietnam ground on. The My Lai massacre, where American soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians, had occurred in March 1968. But news broke in 1969. Photos of bodies in ditches filled newspapers. America was forced to confront the reality that atrocities weren't just committed by the enemy. Drug culture, celebrated in music and fashion, had a body count. Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Jim Morrison would all be dead within 2 years, all from drug-related causes. In 1969, you could see the beginning of that tragedy. The generation gap wasn't just about fashion or music, it was about fundamental values, and it was tearing families apart. Sons were refusing the draft and fleeing to Canada. Parents were disowning children for their lifestyle choices. The phrase, "don't trust anyone over 30, captured the contempt young people felt for their elders. And beneath all the social upheaval, there was a simmering anger and fear. Race riots had torn through American cities in previous summers. Assassinations had become almost routine. John F. Kennedy in 63, Malcolm X in 65, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy in 68. Violence felt like it could erupt anywhere, anytime. What they didn't know. Living through 1969 meant living in a moment of pure possibility and pure uncertainty. People genuinely didn't know what would happen next. They didn't know that the moon landing would be one of only 6 successful lunar landings, and that we'd never go back. In 1969, people thought moon bases and Mars missions were just around the corner. They didn't know that the Beatles, the biggest band in the world, would break up within a year, or that John Lennon would be murdered in 1980. They didn't know that the Vietnam War would drag on for 6 more years, claiming thousands more lives before ending in defeat and withdrawal. They didn't know that Richard Nixon, newly inaugurated in January 1969, would resign in disgrace 5 years later over the Watergate scandal. They couldn't imagine the technology that was coming. No one predicted personal computers, the internet, smartphones, or social media. The idea that you'd carry a device in your pocket with access to all human knowledge would have seemed like science fiction. Hell, it was science fiction. They thought some things would last forever that didn't. Drive-in theaters, record stores, written letters, phone booths, the milkman, TV repair shops. All of these were normal parts of life in 1969, and all would eventually disappear. They thought some problems would never be solved that were. Smallpox still existed in 1969. It would be completely eradicated by 1980. The Berlin Wall seemed permanent. It fell in 1989. The Soviet Union seemed eternal. It collapsed in 1991. And they had no idea how much their music, fashion, and culture would echo through the decades. The songs recorded in 1969 are still played today. The fashion comes back in cycles. The social movements they started for civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, environmental protection are still being fought. So, what was it really like to live in 1969? It was slower. Information moved at the speed of mail and newspapers and scheduled broadcasts. You couldn't instantly fact-check something or look up a random question. You lived with uncertainty and waited for answers. It was more communal. You watched the same TV shows as your neighbors because you all had the same 3 channels. You listened to the same radio stations. You saw the same movies. Shared culture was truly shared. It was more divided. The generation gap was a chasm. The culture war was just beginning. You could literally see someone's politics in their hair length and clothing choices. It was more optimistic and more pessimistic at the same time. We could land on the moon. Anything was possible. But we were also mired in an endless war. Society was fracturing and violence seemed everywhere. Life had texture in 1969. Records crackled. Film had grain. TV had static. Everything was physical, tangible, real in a way that digital life isn't. But it was also more limited. Information was scarce. Communication was difficult. Entertainment options were narrow. When we look back at 1969, we tend to focus on the iconic moments. Armstrong on the moon, Woodstock in the mud, the Beatles on Abbey Road. But life was also grocery shopping and going to work and watching the evening news and wondering what tomorrow would bring. The summer of 1969 changed the world because it proved that change was possible, that humans could walk on another world, that hundreds of thousands of young people could gather peacefully in a field, that social movements could challenge entrenched power, that culture itself could transform within a single generation. But it also showed the limits and costs of change. Not every revolution succeeds. Not every dream survives contact with reality. Progress and backlash exist in constant tension. We're still living in the world that 1969 created. The technology that put humans on the moon led directly to the computers and smartphones we use today. The social movements that exploded that year are still defining our politics. The music is still playing. The debates are still raging. If you could go back to 1969, you'd find a world that's simultaneously familiar and utterly foreign. You'd recognize the hopes and fears, the music and movies, the basic rhythms of daily life. But you'd also feel the absence of everything we take for granted now. The connectivity, the convenience, the instant access to information and entertainment. That was life in 1969, the summer the world changed, the summer we walked on the moon and danced in the mud, the summer when everything old was questioned and everything new seemed possible, the summer we can never quite leave behind.